I'm very proud to be here and to be able to present to you something, as the mayor of Landskrona, something about one of the greatest sons of Landskrona, Alvar Gullstrand. My name is EHINGER, as you just heard, and I was professor of ophthalmology at Lund, retired some few years ago. And of course, Alvar Gullstrand is the most prominent ophthalmologist ever in Sweden. He received the Nobel Prize in 1911, and very rightly so. All of you, every ophthalmologist, every optometrist, every optician uses his inventions every day. You may not know it, but you do. For instance, this one, it's the slit lamp that he introduced in 1911 and which revolutionized ophthalmology. Suddenly, you can determine what you see. And most of you don't work with an equipment like this, of course. It looks more like this. And this is where you have the slit lamp. It has been transformed in several different ways, mechanically, but it's still the same principle that's used. But also, the way we refract people is the method of Donders, empirically found by Cornelis Donders in the middle of the 19th century. It was Alvar Gullstrand that decided, that actually worked out the principles, the theoretical background of what's happening when you're refracting this way. And this way is preferable to other ways, the method of Chaval, for instance, in Paris, which of course was very prominent in France and in Britain and in some places in the United States also. But this method is the one I used every day when I was still an ophthalmologist, and which is still widely used, at least on the continent, in Germany, in Scandinavia. But he also devised the indirect, reflex-free, big, great ophthalmoscope. And you can see it at his side on the painting there, which comes from the Swedish Society of Medicine in Stockholm. And Nordensson converted it into a fundus camera, and whenever you or I take a fundus photograph, it's done according to the principles set down by Alvar Gullstrand, and of course further developed by Nordensson and Zeiss. And this was the standard fundus camera up until the Second World War, roughly. He's also the man behind the Gullstrand lens, a 14 diopter aspheric lens, which was used very much for indirect ophthalmoscopy. My young colleagues don't use it any longer. They use other methods and other lenses too. But for several decades, this was the standard method in Scandinavia and in many parts of the world too, in Europe, for ophthalmoscopy. It's very convenient, it's fast, and you don't have to dilate the pupil, which is one of its advantages. It's a little bit tricky to learn. Once you know it, it's quite good. As I said, he was born in Landskrona in 1862. He went to school in Landskrona, but he was bright already from the very beginning, and the schools were not able to handle him actually. He presumably would, today he would have had some psychiatric diagnosis probably. He was bored at school, so he ran around and played mostly in the port here, was a prankster in the port in his own words. And his parents, his father was a city physician here in Landskrona, decided that maybe we should try to find a better school for him and his sister and his brother. So they moved to Jönköping in the middle of Sweden. And there they found an excellent school, an excellent teacher. When he was in his early teens, he was mathematics professor, as a matter of fact. He wasn't a professor. There weren't professors of mathematics in Jönköping, but he had the standard of a professor of mathematics. And he taught Alvar Gullstrand everything there was to be known about mathematics at the university level. So when Alvar Gullstrand matriculated in Jönköping, he had a university level of mathematics. He could do infinitesimal calculus like anything. I can do addition and subtraction, maybe multiplication, but he would do infinitesimal calculus like I would do subtraction or addition. And he decided that maybe he should be an engineer, or he should become an engineer, but his father convinced him by hiring him for a summer as an assistant in his practice, that maybe it was better to become a doctor. So he entered medical school at Uppsala and got his education there, his training there. Part of the training he actually got in Vienna. He spent a year in Vienna to learn ophthalmoscopy, because in those days, we're now talking about the end of the 19th century, ophthalmology was at its peak. It was just beginning to develop. And then he went back to Sweden, to Stockholm, as a matter of fact, and there he got his MD. In his medical studies, he decided already early on that the old theory of Sturm, the Frenchman, Sturm, on what astigmatism is like mathematically was incomplete and actually misleading. And when he was offered a position to make an MD PhD in Stockholm, he decided that he should do that, and he should recalculate the formulas for astigmatism, which he did all on his own. He had no tutor. He devised his own mathematical methods, and he was successful, very successful. I have seen his thesis, I have read his thesis. Have I understood it? You guess. No, of course not. This is what it looks like. And yes, you can read it, I can read the book, the letters and the numbers, but I don't understand mathematics as deeply as he did. And he got the highest report that you could get, and he was immediately offered a position. He was diligent like anyone. He worked hard. Not only did he work on his thesis, he also was amanuensis, that is junior clerk at the Swedish medical healthcare system, healthcare administration. And he started a private practice. He worked from 8 o'clock in the morning to late after midnight. And he did so continuously. Weekdays, Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, all the time. And he once said that if you don't tremble at the end of the semester from tiredness, you've not done your duty. And indeed, he did his duty. He did very well. And in 1894, he was offered the chair as professor in Uppsala. They didn't have any professor in ophthalmology there. They didn't even have any teaching in ophthalmology. So he set up a new department. He was offered resources for that, and that was finished in 1903. And he also he organized teaching. And at the same time, he ran a clinic and some private practice, and he continued on with the work that he had done as a student, as his PhD work. So at night time he was doing mathematics all the time. And his goal, and he was quite successful in that, was to describe in minute detail the optics of the normal eye, or actually, rumor has it, actually the optics of his wife's eye. That's where he made his measurements, probably, perhaps not. But he also was a dominating administrator. He read all the papers at the faculty meetings. He decided on his own what the faculty should decide. He had a proposal, ready written proposal on every important matter. And his colleagues found that usually he was quite nice. His ideas were quite good, so they got into the habit of accepting whatever he said. And he got such a strong position that he was able, or he told actually the faculty, that when I have spoken, it's a waste of time to speak further. And it was. He was quite dominating. He was one of the three founding fathers of the Swedish Ophthalmological Society, and he continued impressive theoretical achievements on the dioptrics of the human eye. He became a member of the Royal Swedish Society of Sciences. He entered the class of physics, not the class of medicine. And as a point in that, and in 1911, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. Already at that time, he had become, I'll skip that. Well, maybe not. He was very proud of himself. He was very, very fond of titles and nobilities, and he used to actually to throw parties with noblemen, and he was at parties with the king also, and he was very proud of himself. He said at his lectures to the students that it's allowed to smoke here by me, not by you. And if anything, you're welcome to have questions, and if there is any discussion, I am always right, because he usually was. Here you have the king, and it's a sign of nobility that you can smoke. In those days, nowadays it's quite different. When he was offered a chair at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, which wasn't as well regarded as it is today, he declined. And so instead Albin Dahlén got the chair, and Gullstrand said, yes, it's a lesser loss to silence if he gets it than if I get it. Because Stockholm was a little bit less regarded in those days than today. You recognize the man? Well, this is Albert Einstein. And in 1904, I think it was, he began publishing his theory of relativity, which flew in the face of Gullstrand, because he spent all his life measuring things, and here came somebody with a theory that said that you can't do it with high precision. So Albert Gullstrand at the Royal Scientific Society in Stockholm, where he was in the Nobel Committee, resisted Einstein getting the Nobel Prize for 10 years. And when Gullstrand said no, it was a no. But finally, after the First World War, round about 1921, the results have been published about solar eclipse, the solar eclipse of the measurements of the bending of the light in the solar eclipse, and most of all, Niels Bohr in Copenhagen had developed his theory on the atomic forces of hydrogen by spectroscopy, based on Einstein's theories. And measurements were made by Bohr and his collaborators, which were precisely what Einstein had predicted. So evidence mounted in the scientific world, opinion mounted in the scientific world, the pressure on the Nobel Committee for Physics got very high that Einstein should have the Nobel Prize. But Gullstrand said no, even though Bohr had proved parts of his theory, the theory of relativity includes gravity, and that was not proven. And indeed it still isn't. Nobody knows exactly what gravity is, and nobody has a good theoretical basis on what it is. But finally, Willem Lucien, professor of ophthalmology in Uppsala, professor of physics in Uppsala, and a friend of Alvar Gullstrand. He used to play chess with Alvar Gullstrand until Gullstrand one day lost, and then of course they stopped playing chess. But they stayed on as friends. And Lucien said, well, maybe you can't give Einstein the Nobel Prize for his theory of relativity, but Bohr's work is so good and so precisely what Einstein has predicted. So maybe we can give Einstein the prize for the photoelectric effect, which was actually what Bohr had proven. And so Gullstrand said, yes, okay, finally, in 1921, he said, yes, okay, but we can give it to the Nobel Prize to Einstein. And he got the prize in physics for 1921, but he got it only in 1922. And it's the only Nobel Prize recorded where it has been officially stated what it was not given for. It was not given for the theory of relativity. It was given for the photoelectric effect. So that was what Alvar Gullstrand actually influenced. He was born in Landskrona, like I said here. He studied in Jönköping. He got the Nobel Prize for his description of the dioptrics of the eye. He was self-taught. Well, his mathematical work was all made by himself. He was stubborn, he was persistent, he was self-confident, and he designed, most of all, which might interest you, first versions of several instruments in daily use by any modern optician, optometrist.